here. Okay. So thanks, folks, for showing up to the very first edition of the SOCM Spotlight. This is a brainchild of some of our staff members at SOCM who were interested in a different avenue for learning more about our member leaders and also being able to take a deep dive in a different formats other than written into some of our public education work and some of our housing work and some of the things that we're doing right now that a lot of folks are involved in. And we thought that the opportunity to meet these folks that are doing all this great work would be very helpful, and also hear exactly from them what the work is and how you can get involved. And so please, this is again our very first one, and so I think we got all the technical stuff figured out, but I do apologize if something goes wrong here. And I do want to ask everyone to please turn off their cameras and mute themselves, so that right now, as we have only the 3 participants, and so it looks like all of our participants have done that, so I appreciate that. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So that are kind of our ground rules. This will be recorded. We are recording on August 17th, 2023, in the hopes of putting it on our YouTube channel. It's SOCM Justice is the name of our YouTube channel. And so if you are watching this much later than August 17th, 2023, some of the links we mentioned or some of the actions that we mentioned may be a little bit outdated. So keep an eye on socm.org for updated links and action alerts. A couple of very quick announcements. Please follow us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook, and we post pretty heavily on there. So that's a good way to keep updated with all of our work. Also, if you go to socm.org and you go to the very bottom of the homepage there, then you'll see that you can subscribe to our e-newsletter list, which is sent out once a week. And our annual meeting is coming up October 7th and 8th at Cumberland Mountain State Park. And registration for the annual meeting ends on September 5th. So please register for the annual meeting. Again, you can go to socm.org and register there. And that's open to all members and friends and anyone interested in learning more about SOCM. So today we are going to talk about SOCM's public education campaign and our work to support public ed in Tennessee. So I'm joined by Dustin Park. He is one of our member leaders in Blount County. And for those of you that are not from around the East Tennessee area, Blount County is in East Tennessee. It's in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. It's beautiful there, and it's next to Knox County, where Knoxville is. And 2 of the municipalities there that you might recognize are Maryville and Alcoa. So Dustin has been working with us since, I believe, at least the summer, and he's been very involved locally in the local Blount County Public Education Pod. I'm also joined by Liv Cook. She is our newest community organizer. She's our public education campaign organizer, and she joins us from McMinn County. McMinn is in East Tennessee as well. It's about halfway between Chattanooga and Knoxville. And she is a former teacher who we were just talking a little bit earlier about. This is her first year not starting school this week. And so we're really glad to have her. She's been doing a wonderful job. And so I'm very excited to have the 2 of them on today to talk a little bit more about this really important work. So that said, thank you both for being here. Dustin, do you want to introduce yourself to folks and talk a little bit about how you got involved in this work, what brought you to SOCM, and some of the things that you're currently working on in Blount County?
Sure. My name is Dustin Park. I have been in Blount County for 7 years now. We moved here from the Chicago area in 2016. I would say I started to become involved in kind of public education advocacy because I have 3 kids, and my middle child has Down syndrome. So early on in his education, we ran into some conflict with a school up in Illinois, and I quickly had to kind of become an advocate for him and learn advocacy. And I think through that, I realized I would like to engage in that work, not just for my kids, but for all kids. So that's kind of where the bug was planted. And then when we moved to East Tennessee, I knew that, when we moved here, I would have to get engaged quickly And as soon as we got here, to really kind of head off the consequences of what happened in Illinois, you know. So that's kind of how it started. And that's how I got into kind of the PTO world, because I went to the principals and I said, you know, I was interested in doing something with disability. And they were like, well, we don't really have that. So why don't you join the PTO? Fast forward a few years later, I became the president of the PTO at my kid's elementary school. I'm president of the PTO at the intermediate school this year. So that's been a really cool experience and a really great way to be at the schools and meet people and build relationships. And then I also pretty quickly got engaged with the NAACP here in Blount County, and I'm on the education committee for them. And that is how I got connected with SOCM, was that my role on the education committee for the NAACP has kind of been with a focus on curriculum. I've been doing that for probably 3 or 4 years. And then that kind of dovetailed with legislative affairs. So when the 3rd grade retention law kind of came on my radar, I was researching that and keeping our committee updated on that and engaging people through the NAACP. And then the chair of our committee connected me with SOCM. And as I became involved with SOCM, they grabbed me too. And it's funny because I joke with my wife that it's like I can't put another thing on my plate, but this really kind of felt like the culmination of a lot of different avenues of my volunteer and advocacy, because it kind of is this overarching all public school campaign, and pretty much everything I volunteer in has some sort of educational component. So it felt right that it would all kind of feed into this. And I think that this is a good complement of all of those things that I've been working on.
Excellent. That's really wonderful to hear. So Dustin, you mentioned the 3rd grade retention law, and that's been a very big focus of SOCM over the last year, and I think will continue to be. So would you just give our folks a little bit of an update of what that is?
So the 3rd grade retention law was passed a year ago, actually, at the special session, which I hadn't realized because it came on my radar later than that. And I saw that Gloria Johnson mentioned, hey, guess what they did in the last special session? So, and what that law said was that if a 3rd grader did not score above a certain percentage on the ELA TCAP, that they would be retained in 3rd grade. And they gave those kids the option of doing tutoring and or summer school in order to move on to 4th grade. But the way the law was written and the way it was rolled out, it was very unclear. It was not communicated properly. Consequences of that action were not thought out. And so it really led to, I mean, as a lot of people saw, kind of a train wreck at the end of the year. Thankfully, there was an appeals process set up. It seems like the appeals process got a lot of kids to be able to move on to 4th grade, but there's still a lot of questions whether or not they may be retained in 4th grade now. So there's a lot of questions. They did revisit this law in the past legislative session. The legislators we talked to said that this single issue is the most they have heard from their constituents about any issue at this point. And they did make some changes. They were not very big. They were kind of working around the edges. So the law largely remains intact, and we still think that it is not addressing the issues it's supposed to address, which is deficiencies in early childhood literacy, which are best addressed by putting trained reading specialists in the classroom from K through 2 and doing interventions earlier on, as opposed to kind of the draconian measure of just putting a kid back in 3rd grade. So that work continues, but I think the public education campaign kind of grew out of that to be a broader campaign to defend public education and any sort of attacks that are coming at it to weaken our schools, basically.
Liv, can you tell me a little bit about what your role is as community organizer and campaign organizer for the public ed work?
Yeah, so my role is I act as kind of acting some structure, bringing more people into the work. I help coordinate our public ed steering committee. So SOCM is a member-run organization, which is part of what I love about it. So we actually have members that are making like these big decisions about where we're going in our public ed work. So part of my job is helping convene those meetings, recruiting people into the work, and also offering some trainings and structure. So over the summer, we actually had some deep listening training about how to have one-on-one conversations around public education issues and bridge those divides. I live in a rural area, so definitely very familiar with that polarization. So yeah, a lot of my work is just getting people together, offering some of that structure, and really teaching communities how to build power, and that people actually do belong where decisions are being made, not just these stakeholders who, you know, may or may not have even been in a classroom the last several years. So that's kind of the overview of what I do.
It's great to have you on board because it's really nice that you've got that background as a teacher as well, because we are talking about students here, but I think we're also talking about teachers, and we're talking about anyone who's involved in public education work, right? There's a lot of things that need to be changed, and a lot of support that needs to be given to a lot of different kinds of folks, I think. So I'll go back to Dustin. Can you tell me one of the most exciting things that you've seen come out of this work, one of the most inspiring things that have happened over the last couple months? Just something that really was exciting to you because you've been doing this kind of work for a long time. And so what's something really interesting that has happened?
Well, I think we've talked about this a lot, and as I mentioned, this kind of is what the whole campaign came from, is that the third grade retention law is the most I've ever seen people become engaged who are not previously engaged in the work. So I think because it affected people so directly and they saw the effects so kind of viscerally, that I had so many people say, you know, I can't believe this happened. I want to know more. I want to know how these kind of things happen. And I want to be able to kind of head them off, you know. So it's led to really good conversations with people who weren't having those conversations before, which I think is really encouraging. Obviously, the flip side of that and the hardest part of this work is keeping those people engaged and keeping ourselves engaged. That's always the hardest part because it is a long game. It's easy to get riled up about one issue, but when you realize it's part of a whole kind of systemic issue, it can become overwhelming very quickly. But I think that was that's what's great, is that you know, when you can pin kind of a larger idea on one issue and be able to draw the lines between those, that's really helpful. And I think we've been able to do that. And beyond that, you know, it's just, for better or worse, public education has been in the news, you know, and a lot of it has been negative and having to do with fights over it, but people are talking about it. And I mean, that's all we can really ask for, is to be able to engage people and talk about it and really get to the heart of, like, you know, we send our kids to school and we don't often think about why it's important that they're there and that we support them as a community. And I think that is the part that is the most important, is, you know, whether or not you have kids in a school, our entire community benefits and needs those public schools to be strong in order to continue to have a strong community and society.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting things, one of which is getting people engaged and staying engaged. What are some ways that people who want to be engaged can do that through SOCM?
So we've set, part of the public education campaign, we have set up these pods, which are really kind of structured, I guess, by county right now. I think we have about 8 across the state. We have one here in Blount County. There's one in Knox County. The one in Knox County, there was already kind of a public education team that was doing work there that have kind of melded that into the pod. I know there's one down in McMinn, there's one in Davidson. So we get together, there's a core of us that get together every couple weeks and talk about what we're doing. But these pods are really kind of meant to be the very kind of local grassroots level organizing that we're working on. And we just, a few weeks ago, had our first event for that. We had a cookout in the Rockford community, which is a kind of centered around the elementary school there here in Blount County, in the Blount County schools. We had some parents come out and talk about their public schools and what they love about them, what they want to see changed. And it was really great to engage people and we saw some county commissioners there, and we talked to parents and teachers. And that's kind of the model we'd like to do, is hopefully we can engage people in different smaller communities within the county and start to kind of make those connections with whether it be a school or a community center or a district, stuff like that. So really, I think on that level, people can get involved by either joining that pod or coming to one of those events. We do have statewide calls periodically. Liv, I'm sure, can talk about that more. But I would say on the ground level, if people are really interested in getting involved with SOCM in the community, their local pod would be the best way to do that. And Liv has links she can share for that, I'm sure.
Liv, do you want to share those links with us?
And yeah, so if you go to our linktree / SOCM Public Ed, you can find all kinds of links to get involved. And I'll just add to that too, that local level work. Something really easy is that, if you get in with a pod, go to your local school board meeting, wear a SOCM button, wear a SOCM t-shirt. 2 or 3 people showing up every time, that makes a huge difference. And it builds public accountability, it builds relationship with each other. So you don't have to be this like master organizer to make a difference in your community. It just starts with showing up and being willing to have that conversation. And that's something that I've really enjoyed seeing with SOCM's theory of change, or the way that we want to see change happen in our communities, is that it has to start with relationships. And that's what I've loved seeing in Blount County and in our other areas as well, is seeing people being like, oh yeah, I can do something. I can like my neighbor and like sit with my neighbor and have a conversation and show up to where these decisions are happening and make a difference.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that too, is that, so that's something I started doing as part of the NAACP is I started going to Maryville City School board meetings every month, which I've been doing for a couple of years now. And because I'm one of the few non-district people there, after a few times they recognize you. And so you'll eventually start having conversations with those school board members. I now have relationships with many of them. And so, if something comes up, I can email them and they will know who I am because I'm there. You know what I mean? So that it's really invaluable. And even if you don't, necessarily establish those relationships, just being there and being present is great. I mean, I just love knowing what's going on, and you get to know what's going on. And a lot of times, I go back to what I said before, where people were like, how did this happen? Where did it come from? Well, a lot of times stuff like that originates at school board meetings, and you'll find out about it there, and it may not trickle down to everybody,
So this next question is for either of you, because you both mentioned this a little bit. Relationships are obviously incredibly important, and we're obviously working on a local level in addition to some of the more statewide things like the 3rd grade retention law. What are some things that you've been hearing from people in those conversations about what they want public schools to look like in Tennessee?
I mean, a lot of it has been around 3rd grade retention. So, a lot of people have talked about that they feel like it is a hard thing for kids, a hard thing for teachers, a hard thing for students. That also has led to larger conversations about testing, which is great. And I think people are starting to kind of clue into how much testing the kids do, whether that's necessary. From the majority of people I've talked to, they feel like it probably isn't. And obviously those of us who are around schools know that teachers spend a lot of time teaching to the tests, and that time a lot of times can be better used actually teaching the curriculum, So I think that's one thing. I mean, there's a host of issues, and it really, what Liv was talking about, there's definitely divides between the city districts, the rural districts. They all have different needs. I know mental health is a huge one. Obviously school safety is a big one. We're seeing that right now. And with a special session potentially coming up, that's on the top of everybody's mind. And I've just noticed already at the beginning of the school year, there is a tighter hold on security, which I think is good and is necessary. But I think at the end of the day, that's the parents want their schools to be safe, but they want them to be welcoming, and they want their kids to enjoy going, and I think that kind of got to the crux of the 3rd grade retention issue too, is like you had kids who loved school who got caught up in this net and started saying things like that they didn't want to go to school, they didn't want to be there, they didn't want to, and that's just heartbreaking.
It is. Liv, how about you? What are some things that you've been hearing?
Yeah, I think that's widely felt. Even, my most direct experience is here in McMinn County, where I live. And it's a lot of those same things. People want their schools to be safe. They want their kids to be well educated. I'm finding that we've got really different ideas of what that looks like. We're really polarized about it. And sometimes it's really hard to have a conversation about curriculum. It's hard to have a conversation about what safe means. But I'm learning that even where I might initially disagree with somebody, or we have very different ideas of what those things mean, we both have this commitment that we really care about our kids. And so figuring out where those fears are for people, figuring out how we can connect their fears to this idea of community, and that together we can maybe vision something better. A lot of folks, I know in McMinn County, we have Title I schools. A lot of these folks they've been told they can't vision for better. So just even where we might not get to the same place, seeing them open up and say, oh, I can talk about this. I can have a dream for what matters, has been huge. And it's the biggest issues I've seen have been things like testing. That's one common ground. If we disagree on everything else, they're not a fan of standardized testing. And then a lot of it's coming back to funding. We fund what we think matters. And right now that it appears that that's not been a priority for a lot of places in Tennessee, funding our schools well. So figuring out conversations, getting community input on those things is part of the path forward. But I think there's some hope in that maybe we're feeling a little less alone in these conversations.
Good. I want to ask a little bit about the future of the public education campaign and what the work is going to be looking like in this next year. I think because public education is on everyone's mind, Dustin, like you said, it's in the news a lot, and a lot of people have been directly affected by things like the third grade retention law, or like you said, you even saw security was tighter this year. And so it's on everyone's mind. And so what is the Public Education Committee going to be looking at this year? And what are some ways that we think we can affect change in our local communities and in our statewide communities? So what are we looking at? What are the issues? And how do we decide what those issues are? And how do we decide what to do about them?
So one thing that has been on my radar and continues to be on my radar is charter schools and the voucher program. And the voucher program has been expanded into Hamilton County now and is already showing effects of taking money from public schools. And there was a push that was not very strong last session to make it statewide. I expect that to continue into this session. And that, especially the voucher program, anybody I can talk to, I will paint the picture of how that directly removes money from public schools. It's pretty cut and dry how that works. And especially with the new TISA funding formula, that puts a dollar number on every single student in Tennessee so that it makes it very easy for them to say, okay, when this kid takes a voucher, that money is removed from the public school and it goes to the family for them to use wherever and however they want. And another thing I like to point out to whomever will listen about that voucher program is that in order for a child with an IEP to get a voucher, they have to sign all of their federal due process rights away and do not have any rights to guarantee that they are getting a fair and appropriate education with that money.
Can you sorry, I just for our audience explain what an IEP is?
Oh yeah, so an IEP is an individualized education program, which is what kids with disabilities have in order to kind of set goals for themselves, because obviously it's a wide variety of abilities for kids who are participating in special ed programs across the state. And what an IEP does is it guarantees that that child, by federal law, is getting what's called FAPE, F-A-P-E, free appropriate public education, which is guaranteed under federal law. And the voucher program is really meant as a way to circumvent federal education law. That's really what it was crafted for. It was crafted to remove money from public education. So that is a issue that I'm very passionate about, because it's pretty clear how you can paint that harms public schools. And right now that program only exists in Davidson, Hamilton, and Shelby counties. But like I said, the eventual goal is to make that statewide. The charter schools obviously are popping up all across the state and are a huge priority for our governor and the legislature. That can be a little bit muddier because they like to paint them as public schools, but really, again, they are drawing money away from our public schools that are accountable to our school boards and sending them to what essentially are private schools, charter schools that are not accountable to our school boards. And on top of that, I think one of the most eye-opening things that came to my attention was that essentially someone could buy a piece of real estate, build a school, and start collecting tax money from a charter school. So we essentially, if you have a charter school, taxpayers could be directly paying a private entity for that land, which is wrong. So the encouraging thing on that side is we had, and this was, a lot of this was done in conjunction with SOCM, is that there were 5 counties across the state that had charter applications submitted, and 4 of those were denied by the local school boards. So that was a really great victory across the state. That is only going to continue and expand. I know Knoxville already had one last year approved. I'm sure there's going to be more. I've heard word that there's going to be one in Blount County. So, you know, that's really another issue where we can have a conversation. I mean, people are going to disagree, like Liv said, but it's a conversation we can have about, you know, that's funding and that's money that is going to be removed from those public schools. So that is something that's going to affect local communities and is going to be a statewide issue, you know, and that's, I think those 2 issues, the 3rd grade retention law continuing to be an issue. I think standardized testing, it sounds like the Knoxville folks are kind of starting to concentrate on that as well. So that'll be interesting to see that. And then school safety obviously reminds, that really hasn't been part of our purview in this public education campaign. We've really kind of focused on policy and curriculum and kind of the nuts and bolts in school. But that's obviously going to be top of people's minds as well.
No big deal. Just everything. Liv, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think so a lot of our efforts over the summer and going into the fall has been doing this like really crucial listening work. And listening is difficult, especially in polarized places, but really having those one-on-one conversations, having those cookouts, those social events to really hear from people. What do you want from your schools? What do you need to make that happen? So, you know, I think what we've been setting the groundwork for is to build a platform that is community informed, where we've set a platform where we can actually make budget proposals in our communities and say, hey, this is what we need funded and we need you to invest in it. We're going to organize families around that. So I think my hopes for the future with this SOCM work is seeing people locally engaged and recognizing that local work matters. Those local county commission meetings, those local school board meetings, they matter to this broader statewide work. And it's important that you're showing up and it's important that you're speaking up. And I think also too, you know, we've kind of got this this background of like this privatization playbook and how all of these attacks on public education, it's a concerted effort. It's very intentional. So I think finding those ways, finding that good ladder of engagement or those different ways that people, no matter how spread thin they are, can find a way to plug in, I think is going to be really crucial work for us. And painting that picture that we don't have to point the finger at each other. We actually can work together to build something really great. So I know that's like a very philosophical, maybe not super concrete view, but I'm really hopeful for our vision of what we can do at SOCM and how we can partner with each other across the state and build our power. So that we can get folks pointing fingers in the right direction and working together rather than trying to tear each other down.
That's a wonderful way to end our conversation. We've got about 1 minute left. I don't see anything in the chat, any questions in the chat. So if I wanted to say, if anyone has any comments on this new format for the SOCM Spotlight that we just started today, please email us at info@socm.org. And again, you can go to the Linktree, which is on both of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and also on our socm.org. So if you have anything that you wanted to ask, or any way that you wanted to get involved, or look a little bit more into what we're doing, please go to socm.org. And before we leave, Dustin and Liv, thank you so very much for this conversation, and we really appreciate it. If you need to get in touch with Liv, it's Liv, Liv, at socm.org. And again, if you have general comments about the SOCM Spotlight, please email us at info@socm.org. And so thank you both so very much for being the first ones to do the SOCM Spotlight. And I think it's been very helpful to learn more about our public education work. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. So Thanks everybody. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks
Thanks.
for having